Ukraine plans to receive information from the European Union about all Ukrainian citizens residing in Europe. And this was officially announced by the Minister of Social Policy of Ukraine, Denis Uliutin. And in fact, I would like to discuss this topic in as much detail as possible today, because on May 7, he had a meeting with the European Commissioner for Migration, Magnus Brunner. And a very interesting statement was made. First of all, Uliutin said that our position is clear. We want Ukrainians to return home, but it should be a voluntary and conscious decision. These are very beautiful words, very appropriate and very humane. But at the same time, let's be honest, there is still a bill in the Verkhovna Rada that could make criminals out of all those who left the country completely legally and do not want to return. Furthermore, social benefits in Europe are being reduced. Temporary protection is planned to end in March 2027. And all this is happening along with the pressure caused by the lack of proper consular services. And now the government wants to get data from the European Union about where you live, what you do, how much money you have, and so on. So, today we will not talk about what has been officially stated, said Uliutin, but about what the government is doing in parallel and at the same time, and what this means personally for every Ukrainian living in Europe. Subscribe to the channel, like the video, share it with your friends if you find it useful, and be sure to turn on the notification bell. So first, who is Uliutin and what actually happened? Denis Uliutin is the Minister of Social Policy, Family and Unity of Ukraine, appointed in July of 25 in the Sveredenko government. He was the first Deputy Minister of Finance. On May 7, 2026, he held a meeting with European Commissioner Magnus Brunner, the person who is actually responsible for migration policy in the European Union. And the central topic is what will happen to Ukrainians in the EU after March 2027, when temporary protection ends. And separately, Uliutin specifically raised the issue of personal and private data.
Для України важливо отримати дані
regarding Ukrainians who are under temporary protection in the countries of the European Union, especially concerning vulnerable categories of the population. This is necessary for planning return policies and preparing communities. This is an official statement by Uliutin, and he additionally said that the relevant documents are already being prepared upon request. The official position, as we see, is to plan for the return of Ukrainians from abroad. In other words, no one is planning to end the war. They already plan to bring Ukrainians back from abroad, so that supposedly communities in Ukraine know how many people to expect and what they need. But let's look at what's really happening and what's happening in parallel. What does this voluntary return mean? Because it comes up in every other statement from the Ukrainian government, Ukrainian politicians, and so on. But there are tools that are used in parallel at the same time, and they actually don't really resemble the supposedly voluntary approach that the Ukrainian authorities keep telling us about, because there's actually nothing voluntary about it. There are four main tools that are being used right now. And tell me, please, is this really voluntary? The first is economic pressure. Uliutin himself confirmed that the government does not plan to pay compensation for returning. So the focus is on developing certain communities. At the same time, we see that in Europe, including with the support of the Ukrainian authorities, payments are being reduced. And more than once, both on the telemarathon and among the deputies, there was information that for those Ukrainians living abroad, everything should be done to reduce the payments they receive there, so that they return home to defend the country. So it's clear. In fact, this is not encouragement to return. This is punishment for the fact that Ukrainians, on the contrary, stay in Europe, and it's about doing the nastiest thing possible to make them want to come back. The second tool is actually legal pressure. There is a draft law, number 13,673 in the Verkhovna Rada. I analyzed it in detail in the previous video. There will be a link in the description. In short, after this bill is passed, everyone who left legally and did not return after the established period can be made into criminals. Also, fines from 34 to 51,000 hryvnias, or imprisonment from 3 to 5 years. The law hasn't been passed yet, but it's already on the agenda. You know, in my opinion, this is just a plan B. So, But if you're interested, go and watch because it's a really compelling topic. The third tool is informational pressure. Pressure through the media and through social networks. Guilt complex, yes. About draft dodgers, about traitors. We also analyze this mechanism in a separate video. The link will also be in the description under this video, if it's already out by that time. But if not, stay tuned. Subscribe and stay tuned. Because right now there are a lot of materials in drafts. And the fourth tool is actually data collection. What is happening right now? The government wants to know your location, how many of you there are, your activities, and your countries of residence. Whether or not you belong to vulnerable categories, officially, this is for planning purposes. But let's ask ourselves, what kind of planning requires detailed statistics and personal data of specific individuals? It's not necessary. Because for general planning, just the numbers are enough. How many Ukrainians are in each country? Who belongs to vulnerable categories? Who does not? But they definitely don't need to get personal data for this. So, probably, personal data is needed in order to be able to personally influence certain people later. Next, what is and isn't allowed by law today? It's very important to understand that as of today, right now, there is no threat that this data will be transferred. But as Uliutin said, documents are being prepared. Why can't the EU transfer personal data to your Ukraine right now? There is a law called the General Data Protection Regulation, or GDPR, and it's one of the strictest privacy laws in the world. The transfer of personal data to third countries outside the EU is only possible if the European Commission decides that the recipient country provides an equivalent level of protection. Ukraine does not have such a decision. That is, the European Union legally cannot now, today, and I want to emphasize this, cannot today transfer the data of millions of Ukrainians to Ukraine because this would violate this very data protection regulation. But what can actually happen? There are three main options. The first is that it could simply be aggregated statistics without personal data, just how many people are in which country. This, in fact, poses no threat to us at all. The second option is signing a bilateral agreement between Ukraine and the European Union with proper guarantees. Ukraine will prepare the documents and infrastructure, and Uliutin already said the documents are being prepared. When this agreement is ready, its text will determine exactly what and in what format will be transferred. And the third option, the second option poses the greatest threat. The third option is voluntary data collection through the same Unity centers that are now opening all over Europe. Let's remember that it is already open in Berlin and it will open in Stockholm in June. Centers in Poland and the Czech Republic will also open soon. And if you come to the Unity Center for a consultation, you provide your own data yourself. This is legal. And it's important to see what you prepare and sign. You can leak your own data yourself and then create more problems for yourself in the future. So the main conclusion regarding the likelihood of how things will develop is that right now, specifically today, there will not be a mass transfer of personal data. But the process has already started, and its results depend on what kind of agreement the European Union and Ukraine will sign regarding data transfer. If they are interested in sending all men of conscription age, for example, home, then they can sign this, and after that, a whole series of different events will take place. Now, let's put everything together. On one hand, there is talk of Ukrainians making a voluntary informed decision to return. The key factor is safety for the war to end and so on. But on the other hand, the state is preparing to receive 2 million people after the end of active hostilities. The main challenge is whether communities will be able to provide a quality of life that is not worse than in Europe. The answer, of course, is no. Because no one is going to do this, and in principle, it's probably economically impossible right now. That is, the state itself now admits that there are no conditions for return, no safety, and no quality of life compared to the EU. But at the same time, it collects data about you, prepares laws that can punish for not returning, reduces payments, opens centers, and the deputies, where you provide all the information about yourself. It restricts consular services. It supports, or at least does not object to, the aggressive rhetoric that everyone who went abroad is not Ukrainian. They should be deprived of the right to vote, and so on. And something here, as we can see, doesn't add up. So I personally have only one question. If the return is truly voluntary, then why are there so many tools and so much pressure at the same time to make you decide to return voluntarily under pressure? I think this won't work. People will rather just leave the European Union and wave goodbye like this. And the second question, why are they starting to talk about this now? About returning and so on, 10 months before the end of temporary protection. But at the same time, we see that no one is even talking about the end of the war anymore. It's clear the war will continue and there are no negotiations. Everyone is already talking about lowering the mobilization age, closing the borders, and so on. Information about women's mobilization is already appearing. It's still just rumors, but they're being spread publicly. So, what do you think? Will this really be a voluntary return or not? The latter. What should you do now, in practical terms? The main 5 steps I recommend everyone to take. If you're Ukrainian and planning to visit the unity centers, and I hope you are not planning to visit them, in fact, it is not dangerous, automatically. But before visiting, ask yourself what exactly is being collected and what information is stored there, who it might be with, who they might share this information with, and on what legal basis this information about you is being collected at all. Second, monitor the data sharing agreement closely. Uliutin said documents are being prepared, and once published, the agreement's text will show the true scale of data transfer. So follow the news from the Ministry of Social Policy and the announcements of the European Commission. Or you can simply subscribe to my channel and I will definitely cover this topic in the future. So subscribe if you haven't already. Third, March 2027 more precisely, March 4, 2027 is a personal date for every Ukrainian living in Europe and under temporary protection. The Council of the European Union has approved recommendations to end temporary protection after March 4, 2027. After that, EU countries must offer either residence permits or voluntary return programs. For example, this is what Poland is currently doing. So don't wait until the last minute. Find out now what legalization options are available in your country, wherever you live. What will you have after March 2027? Each country has its own rules. By the way, there are no universal solutions right now, so we're still waiting. Fourth, the decision to return is yours alone. No data collection, no center, no minister can force you to return as long as there are no safe conditions. GDPR protects your data, international law also protects it and gives you the right to protection from persecution. But unfortunately, even during deportation, for example, from Poland, if you submit a reason to refuse deportation, if you claim that you could be mobilized and killed at the front, for them this is not a valid reason, it is not considered persecution, and you will still be deported. I personally have an acquaintance who was deported in exactly this way. He stated this reason, but it didn't stop anyone, and just a few hours later he was already in Ukraine. Fifth, if you are a man of conscription age, watch the previous video about Bill 13,673. The link will be in the description. It explains in detail what the risks are and who could be affected, because this bill is exclusively for men, especially for men who have legally left Ukraine. So as a conclusion, we can see Uliutin said the right words, that Ukrainians should return voluntarily, their safety must be ensured, and these should be conscious decisions. Words are one thing, but in practice everything looks a bit different. Collection of data about you, laws that can punish for not returning, reduction of payments, pressure through the end of temporary protection, expiration of passports, and denial of consular services. So in fact, we see what's happening. The state is acting in the context of a demographic crisis, trying to bring people back by any means, using both soft and tough methods at the same time. But we understand that with the horrors of forced conscription happening in Ukraine, very few people will decide to return voluntarily, right? So friends, as of today, your protection is information. If you have it, you are protected. If you don't have it, then you are not protected. So, share this video with your friends, family, and acquaintances. If you found it useful, interesting, if you like this kind of analysis, be sure to write about it in the comments under the video. Thank you all for your support. Have a great day and see you next time.